Welcome back dito sa channel natin, and for today's video, papakita na naman natin yung another video na naman ni Magnus Carlsen kung saan ay nagtabla nga sila sa current world champion rank number 1 during that time, si none other than Garry Kasparov, because by that time si Magnus Carlsen is 13 years old pa lang. So ito na.
Who is the best chess player ever? Could it be Bobby Fischer, or is it a fight between Kasparov and Carlsen? Some chess fans consider Russian Grandmaster Garry Kasparov to be the greatest chess player of all time, while others consider Norwegian giant.
So credit na lang din sa owner ng video na ito, none other than si Checkmate. So thank you for sharing.
And current world chess champion Magnus Carlsen to be the best chess player of all time. Garry Kasparov is 54 years old today, which makes him old enough to be the father of Magnus Carlsen. Because Kasparov retired from professional chess in 2005, a comparison of their current performances yields few conclusions. If both players played a match these days, Magnus Carlsen would undoubtedly be the
So by that time, actually si Garry Kasparov, siya yung pinakamatibay, mabigat na chess player by that time, because isa din siya sa mga undefeated player by that time. So mga kasagsagan nila Karpov, nila Kramnik, nila Anand, so kasabayan sila.
disputed favorite because he regularly plays at the world's highest level, whereas Kasparov primarily commentates elite chess tournaments and occasionally plays blitz and rapid games. Carlsen plays in an era of incredibly precise engines as well as modern theoretical openings, while Kasparov did not have access to such things.
Totoo yan. Dati-rate, wala naman talagang mga chess engine and mga chess programs na po pwedeng magamit. They more focus sa books, coach, and any other means of preparation. Unlike ngayon na marami ng means, chess program napakalaking bagay, lalo na kapag ikaw ay isang baguhan pa lang at nagsisimula pa lang sa chess. Kahit na grandmasters din ay gumagamit din ng mga chess engine. Dahil sobrang lalakas ng mga chess engine.
Back in his prime. To compare these two outstanding chess giants, one needs to take a closer look at their careers. For that reason, this video is going to dive into one of the only games ever played between the two chess legends.
So, ito lang yung laro nila Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen and Grandmaster Garry Kasparov. Wala na silang ibang tournament na nilaruan kasi nga by 2005, nag-retire na sa chess world si Garry Kasparov. And nag-focus na lang siya sa teaching and other means of activities.
Kasparov versus Carlsen. The game starts out with the clocks ticking down, but Kasparov is nowhere to be seen. Kasparov finally appears, but the stakes are extremely high as he's already lost so much time on the clock. He arranges his pieces, and the match begins. Magnus starts the match with pawn to d4, and Kasparov matches with a queen's pawn opening. Magnus moves his next pawn to c4, instantly threatening the black pawn. Kasparov responds with pawn to c6, which is more commonly known as the Slav defense.
So yung ginamit nga dito ni Garry Kasparov, Slav defense, kasi ang opening na ginamit din ni Magnus Carlsen, is the queen's pawn opening.
Commonly used as a defense to the queen's gambit. As they continue to develop their pieces, Kasparov moves his knight to d7, and the game devolves into a queen's gambit declined. Magnus moves a pawn forward to e3, looking to solidify his defense of the middle four squares, which are commonly seen as the strongest and most important squares on the board. However, Kasparov responds by moving his queen over a5, which pins the knight on c3. This forces Magnus to defend the pin by moving his other knight over to d2, which puts it in a weaker position as it can no longer impact the center of the board. Kasparov moves his bishop to b4, reinforcing the pin again, and Magnus responds by moving his queen to c2 to defend his knights. Both players castle, and Kasparov decides that it's time to launch his attack. He plays pawn to d4, capturing Magnus's pawn and taking control of the center. However, Magnus responds with knight to b3, giving him a beautiful fork on the queen and pawn, forcing Kasparov to retreat and capturing back control of the center with a pawn of his own. Another trade in the middle of the board allows Magnus to place his bishop in a strong...
So dito napakaganda ng posisyon ng pieces ni Magnus Carlsen kasi nga controlled niya ang mga long diagonal gamit niya ng kanyang bishop at saka ng kanyang queen.
Position on c4. Right now, both players are fairly even with a slight advantage to Magnus, but time on the clock is starting to run low.
Imagine by that time, sobrang galing na talaga ni Garry Kasparov. Isa siya sa pinakasikat na player by that time. At imagine yung nakakalaban niya na si Magnus Carlsen is 13 years old lang by that time. Imagine kung gaano kalayo ng pagbuhat ng kanilang edad.
Low. Kasparov pulls his queen back to c7, and Magnus responds by activating his rook. Kasparov moves his king side pawn forward to h6, kicking Magnus's bishop on g5. This forces him to retreat the bishop backwards, and black responds by moving the bishop over to d6. This leaves Magnus's king in an extremely precarious position and in danger of a check. If somehow Kasparov can get his queen over to h2, it will be an instant checkmate and the game will be over for Magnus. Luckily for 13-year-old Magnus, he sees this move and pushes his kingside pawn forward to h3, creating some breathing room. And this is where things start to get interesting. A few moves later and Kasparov plays his bishop to h2, checking Magnus's king. Magnus is forced to move without capturing due to the queen directly threatening the same square. Kasparov moves his knight in front of his queen, allowing Magnus to capture the bishop and trade piece for piece. 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen decides that it's his turn to go on the attack. He moves his queen forward to c5 and moves multiple pieces forwards to attack c6. The pawn is looking like it's in big trouble. Magnus captures, they trade pieces back and forth, and Carlsen wins.
So grabe yung combination na ginagamit dito ni Magnus Carlsen. Queen, bishop, tsaka yung knight niya. Dagdag pa natin yung kanyang dalawang rook.
The exchange, coming out a piece ahead. At the same time, he's also threatening to trade his knight for the rook on d8, forcing Kasparov to move it away. At this point in the game, Carlsen has a...
So advantage na dito si Carlsen by that time ng pawn.
Very active and aggressive position over the current world champion, and things start to get really interesting. Kasparov moves his queen to g6, threatening to check Magnus. He responds by moving his queen to block and offering a queen trade. Kasparov accepts and comes out with a small advantage due to the fact that Magnus now has doubled pawns on the g-file. Kasparov attacks Carlsen's backline, moving his rook to e1 and offering a trade. They are now extremely close to the endgame, and Magnus is going into it with a one-pawn advantage over the world champion. The two continue moving their pieces, handing out checks to each other left and right, both playing extremely accurate moves and not allowing the other any room at all. Carlsen moves his rook to h1, checking Kasparov's king and growing his advantage to almost 2 pawns. Kasparov responds by moving his own rook to b2, threatening to win a pawn and forcing Carlsen's king back to g3 to defend. A couple moves later, it seems like a draw is imminent. Both players shake hands and agree on a draw. A truly monumental feat for Magnus Carlsen, proving to himself and the world that even at only 13 years old, he...
So, grabe talaga yung laban na yun. So, kita natin, nagtabla pa nga sila. Although, yung advantage is na kay Magnus Carlsen, kung titingnan natin. Kasi nga, yung kanyang mga pieces is sobrang active. But then, kalaban niya, Garry Kasparov, alam natin kung gaano katibay yan. So, hope na meron kayo nakuha sa video natin for today and hope to see you again for our next video. Bye.